Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hales and special guests.
Hey everybody, it's Randy Hales. This is Talking Memphis Wrestling on a Tuesday night. Wow, yellow and hello again everybody, all that stuff. Randy Dandy, Randy West is in the house. So is Greg and Alvin and all kinds of people in the house. And I'm excited about seeing all you guys, Greg White and the whole crew. Now, getting a little serious, getting a little business, getting a little the announcer voice on a little bit. This show started in 2018, and it started as a Twitter-only show, audio-only show on Twitter, now called X, and all you got was our voices. It was just me. And then it was Adam's voice. And then Randy West. Along came Pat Trammell joining the fold. And then part of the Team Hales, official part of the team, became Michael St. John. And we call it the original four for a reason, because then somebody showed up that's a few years younger than me, and he's an educator, former athletic director, was a baseball player when he was in high school, and going back, and I had the honor of announcing him when I was a baseball, not play-by-play, but announcer for American Legion Baseball. First time in a long time, school's out for the summer, we should see more. First take, Chris Ellis, and welcome back to this here show.
Man, thanks for the intro, RH. It's great to be back, and ironically enough, my first take has to do with baseball. After the first third of the season, I think baseball is going back in the right direction. People putting the ball in play, stealing bases, playing the game the way, quote unquote, it ought to be played. I think there's hope for the national pastime. First time I felt that way in years, but it's way more fun. Hi, PJ. Hi, Calvin. Hi, everybody. Great to be back.
All right, we had a wonderful, wonderful group of people on here, broke all our regular records, and it would have been even better if you'd have been here on a record viewing show, and we've been missing you, but we certainly all understand that how it is in when school's in, man, you're 24/7.
When school's in, it's busy, but thank the good Lord, I'll be on the next 2 months. I should be in good shape. So I'm excited about that because this is something I really love to do.
Didn't you tell me you can't be on next week, or did I dream that?
No, it's 2 or 3 weeks when I'm at basketball officiating camp, when I'm training referees.
So you will be here as far as you know next week.
Yes, sir. I should be. I hope to be for sure.
That is great. Have you been on the show with Rusty yet?
I have not. Never have.
All right. The newest member of the team since we added him to the team, because he is retired, folks, and he's happy and proud of it. Moved from Memphis to New Orleans to California to New Orleans to Texas. Now he then moved back to New Orleans. He still has a place there. Dr. Robinson does, but he is in Orange Beach, Alabama, our newest guy. Make welcome to Talking Memphis Freaking Wrestling, Rusty Robinson. Hey, Doc.
Hey, guys. That was a great introduction. I appreciate it. Yes, we are in Orange Beach. It is, I think summer has officially arrived. It's been very hot for the last few days. The beaches are crowded, the water is warm, and the hotels are full. So it's that time of year. So we're happy to be here. I was going to ask Chris something too. I played American Legion ball back in the day, maybe before Chris's time. I played for the old Bill Spiro's B team, which came from Christian Brothers High School would have been 75 and 6, I think.
You're a little ahead of me. I played for Jonesboro Legion in Arkansas, 83 through 85.
Well, very good. It was good to see another American Legion guy, and good to have another guy on the podcast.
That's great to be back. Good to finally meet you.
Thank you. You too.
Now, I think Rusty heard this. I think Chris was in the background and heard this. This show started in 2019 is when it showed. Show that picture of Eddie Marlin and myself, Adam, one of the last pictures there. This show started in Eddie Marlin's dining room as an audio only show, and the first person to pop in with us is our guest right now. He was 50-50 for being here today, but by golly, he is here. Here's my buddy Pat, freaking Birmingham, Alabama's Trammell.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here. Good to see the Rusty the Doc here, and Chris. This is what we have to do this summer. You and I, we have to go to a race.
We can do it, brother.
We have to go see some dirt.
We can do it.
All right.
You tell me where you want to go and when, and I can do that for sure.
Well, I had to go to Atlanta to one of my other brother Lionel's wedding, and we came back and we drove by the short track, and somebody asked me, do they still race there? I said, I bet they should. Yeah, they still do. So, and I was out there when I was 6 or so. So I want to see some short track racing.
All right, sounds like a plan to me.
Yeah.
Rusty, are you into racing? That's Chris's other passion. Baseball, wrestling, girls. He's married to one of those. And also racing.
So is this stock car racing, Chris?
Yeah. Dirt late models. I actually founded what's called the Comp Cam Super Dirt Series, and all over the South. We raced in 7 states. It's still in business. I sold it, and then I've been a flagman since 1987 and owned 2 racetracks, one not far from where Randy lives. So I've been involved in that my whole life.
So you could get me in a car, in other words, probably, maybe.
Well, I could if you were in Arkansas. I could for sure.
I'll come to Arkansas.
So, next door, right out this window, is Larry Shaw Race Cars.
Okay.
Where I'm sitting, right behind this wall, that used to be Dale McDowell's shop.
Okay.
My office is in Dale McDowell's race shop when he drove for Larry Shaw.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Hey, Chris, do you remember the old racetrack that was near West Memphis? It was off the I-40 at the Hughes exit, and there was a track right there in the 1970s. I think it got torn up or torn down, probably 1980 or thereabouts, but it was very busy at the time. I can't remember the name of it, though, but it was right outside West Memphis.
Okay, so I don't remember that, but now there was actually a NASCAR track outside West Memphis at Lehigh. And
yes, that's it.
Is that it?
Lehigh.
Yeah.
Yes.
They actually raced 2 or 3 races there in the 40s or 50s. It was dirt, but it was a huge racetrack.
Yep. We used to go right by there because I would go to Blue Lake in Arkansas in the summer because I worked out there as a lifeguard. So we went by the racetrack many times. But like I said, I think it's gone now.
Oh, yeah. Been gone for many years.
Anybody else? Before we go to Michael?
Let's get the maestro in.
Ladies and gentlemen, the star of this show, if not, ask Joshua. Here is Michael St. Freaking John. Hey, Michael.
The star of the show is Randy Hales. Can we please get that straight? Golly, Pete, you put the pressure on me, brother.
How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well now. Memorial Day has become an adventure around here with transmitters and stuff. But the weather's better and everything's on tap, so I'm happy. All is well. Let me tell you, I found the secret of picking ribs for a holiday. You guys ready for this?
Go.
All right. My brother-in-law, actually Melanie's, he's really a first cousin, but we call him our brother-in-law. Has been staying here with us. He took a job in Huntsville. They're moving up from Florida, and he's been living with us. He's really good at smoking things and with the grill and all that stuff. So we decide Friday night we're going to have ribs for Memorial Day. So the meat market's closed on Saturday. Too late to go to the meat market. So I end up at Publix, and I don't know what I'm buying. All I know is he was busy. He was at work. Melanie was at the barn with the horses, and they're like, "Go buy ribs. Go buy. We need 4 slabs of ribs. We're going to feed a dozen people." Okay. So I go to Publix at 5:30 on Saturday night. Actually 6:30 on Saturday night after 5:30 mass. And then go back to the meat department, and I'm looking for ribs. The guy comes up in the meat counter, and he's the meat market manager. He's about my age, maybe a few years younger. And I looked at him and I said, "Listen, I have no clue how to pick ribs. I said, but I'll make you a deal. I said, I'll say nice things about you on the radio if you will pick me 4 of the best slabs of ribs that you would feed your family." So this guy gets in the rib cage in Publix on Saturday night, had baby back ribs, 2 slabs for the price of 1. So he's digging and digging. About 10 minutes later, he comes up with 4 slabs. Gentlemen and members of our audience, the best 4 slabs of ribs I have ever had in my life. Now, part of that is Kenny smoking them real slow for like a day and a half. So they're, just falling off the bone. Incredible ribs. So to the meat market manager at the Publix in Gunnersville, Alabama by the lake, my kudos, because the guy, I think I hit a nerve when I said, "Would you get me 4 slabs that you would feed your family?" And trust me, he got me 4 slabs. Took him a while, but well worth it. So gentlemen, second half of helping of ribs tonight, boys.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okey-dokey. All right, man, that sounds good. I had turkey burgers at my niece Amy's house yesterday, and it's the first time I ever had turkey burgers in my life, and they were good as well. Hey, we gonna talk some professional wrestling. We gonna talk some Memphis wrestling. We gonna talk some wrestling history, because I told you, the backbone of this show, the bread and freaking butter of this show, is teaching Memphis wrestling history. And we go way, way back to talk about history. And we are going to now tell you that I have an assignment for everybody. I sent it to a few of my panel members to look at a YouTube clip. I also put it on my Facebook. But if you did not see this, everybody, I want you to go to YouTube after this show is over. Jim Cornette's deep dive on the biggest heel in Nashville wrestling history. We got a couple of pictures we want to show, Adam, toward the bottom. The 2 pictures that I went through are the older pictures at the bottom of that graphic list. Cornette, the best in the world saying the F word and the GD word, but he's the best in the world of knocking Republicans, but he's also the best in the world with wrestling history. This is the guy, Rusty, Pat, Chris, and Michael, that Jim Cornette talks for 55 minutes with figures and win-loss records, attendance, all kinds of stuff on the person that he says drew more money than any heel in the history of Nashville wrestling. And that covers a lot of territory. He first appeared in Nashville in the late 30s, early 40s. He is Pat Malone. He held the Southern Junior Heavyweight Championship title. He also, and I can't find any pictures of him as the Green Shadow, but he did like years undefeated. Had a major program, a major single program with Nick Gulas's partner in the original Tennessee promoter, Roy Welch. Roy Welch and Pat Malone, and I would guess the only people on this show that ever met Pat Malone. I certainly didn't know him in his wrestling days, but as his days of hiding or guarding the dressing rooms in the major towns, ain't no. I don't care if you're a cop, the president of the United States. I don't care. A tough son of a gun, Pat Malone. We'll start with Michael St. John. Michael, did you get the text with that video and the deep dive, and what's your memory?
Listen to the whole thing.
All right.
And let me tell you about Pat Malone. And Pat, before you get off screen, buddy, you remember Pat Malone as a referee in Birmingham on Channel 42.
I do remember Pat Malone as a referee. Absolutely.
And you're absolutely right, Randy. He guarded the dressing room as if it were Fort Knox. And I mean, the first 2 weeks I was the commentator there and was taking the finishes back and forth between the two dressing rooms. There were a couple of times Pat didn't want to let me in. So he was much older at the time, bless his heart. But
he'd have still knocked your ass out.
He could in a heartbeat. He was probably 80 when I met him. And he could knock me and about 5 of the 10 wrestlers that were in the dressing room out, for that matter. But I had heard that story. In fact, Nick Goulas told me that story one day. We were riding back from Chattanooga, and he told me, and something came up, and Pat's name came up, and he said, "Boy, did I ever tell you about Pat Malone? He made us more money than anybody in the history of this business." And I'm like, "What?" But I did not know. I did not follow wrestling in the 50s, and that's really when his heyday was in the 50s. But he was known as the Green Shadow and was the biggest heel in the history of wrestling in the Nashville area. And he did the circuit. I mean, he would wrestle in Huntsville and Chattanooga and Birmingham and up in Bowling Green and some of the other towns. And I'm sure he wrestled at some point in Memphis as well. But an incredible, and when you meet the guy, he was sort of stocky, not real tall, a little shorter than me, but sort of stocky. But he had that face, and I can imagine what it looked like under a mask, because that face was just chiseled. And you looked at him and you said, "This guy's a tough, you know what?" And he was. And when Randy alluded to him guarding the dressing room door, I'm not kidding you. The first 2 weeks I was at the Fairgrounds Arena, he was on the heel side guarding the door, and I was bringing a finish over, and he was like, "What are you doing over here?" I said, "I need to talk to the boy, to so-and-so." And "What for?" And I leaned forward to finish. And I got in, but then he started recognizing me, but it took a while. But what I can only imagine, I've only seen him on a wrestling match in one match. There's a black and white video going around out there. I saw it right about the time I started doing this show with you, Randy, and it came up on it one night as he was wrestling, though, as Pat Malone, not as the Green Shadow. And boy, you talk about he was what's the term we call the wrestlers from back there, not a grappler, but a catcher. Is that what am I saying? What's
Hooker.
The word? Hook. That's it. Yes.
Shooter hooker.
Yes, that's it.
Do you recommend that YouTube podcast from Jim Cornette? I think it's wrestling history done right.
Absolutely. If you got any thoughts about getting the real the people that made the foundation, the people that laid the groundwork for what we see even to this day, you got to listen to this. And Jimmy does a great job of that, as he always does. But he really did a good job on this one.
Search for Jim Cornette deep dive in the biggest heel in Nashville wrestling history. Pat, did you ever see Pat Malone referee, as Mike alluded to?
No, I never saw him wrestling. And Ben, I agree with you. I do love listening to Cornette when he's not talking politics or modern wrestling. And he and Bo James are two people that the Library of Congress needs to sit down with and record for hours and hours and hours, and Randy Hales, and get wrestling history down for the future generations. But I know as Michael said, he refereed some, but he was, I don't know when Pat was born but it was in the
1900.
okay. Well, he was 70 years old when I saw him referee, probably. But yeah, that for everybody, for all our listeners, if you enjoy that kind of thing, and I'm sure you do because you're here. Um, but it is one of the absolute better wrestling history podcasts I've ever heard from anybody, anytime. And you know what speaks to that is it's somebody that most of us don't know. I mean, I had to search my memory and get online and all that, but he does a fantastic job of talking about setting the stage for Nashville and how many people would show up and Pat Malone in the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can highly the only show I could recommend more than that only episode was any random episode of Talking Memphis Wrestling.
Hey, there you go. You know where your bread is buttered on. My bread buttered.
Yes, sir, boss.
Now, Adam pointed out, and Cornette said this. I think just 1900 sounds more exciting and more impressive. It's disputed. I guess he's looking at Wikipedia. But Cornette announced too he was born in 1900 or 1910. No matter what the fact, he's old.
Well, he was 80 when I met him, and that was in 79, 78, or 79 or 80. So, and he told me he was 80. So I think it would be 1900. One thing too about Pat Malone, just on a Birmingham note, he had a big, fierce, one of his last big rivalries. Remember, Pat, and I know this probably predates you because you're a lot younger than I am, but I remember watching Sterling Brewer on TV, and one of his last big rivalries on Channel 42 was Pat Malone against Rowdy Red Roberts. And Rowdy Red lived in Gadsden at the time, and they were both bald and they were both hookers. And they just turned it on. But I can remember Sterling Brewer saying, your referee, and on other matches, I can remember Sterling Brewer would announce the two participants or who was in the match and say, and your referee is Pat Malone. And that would be how he would get into it.
Yeah.
But the Rowdy, I can remember him and Rowdy Red on TV, and they were both in their 60s or so, and they could still put it on.
Adam has a picture because one of the other things that he did was he trained wrestling bears. Roy Welch and Pat Malone were buddies because they were both into training bears and both had Ginger the wrestling bear. And I think Adam found a picture of Pat Malone and Ginger the wrestling bear. That is Pat training Ginger and says he will be able to wrestle soon. And Adam, great job. I don't know where the hell you found that. That's a great picture. We'll go right now to Chris. Chris, your quick comments. Remember, this busy show. This is the most people we have on the panel, maybe ever, but certainly in a long time. We also need to not forget to, I think part of the success last week, we made time to talk to our audience, and certainly we appreciate Ben and Greg and Lucian and Richard and Todd and everybody watching. Chris Ellis, thoughts on Pat Malone and that era that you weren't born yet?
Well, when you sent the homework, I did my research as always, and I kept thinking I've heard that name before, and where I'd heard the name Pat Malone before was he gave a comment to the media when Sam Bass and the Dominoes were killed in a car wreck.
Wow. Okay.
I discovered that looking into this today. He was a person interviewed. He was about a mile behind them when the accident happened and actually talked to Sam on the CB prior to the accident. And then when it talked about him being the Green Shadow, when Cornette talked about that, I'd never heard of the Green Shadow except for when Jim White died. I discovered that Jim White at one time wrestled as the Green Shadow. And so I looked that up again today and thought, am I crazy? Was he Pat Malone's partner? Like, what did all that look like? Totally different deal. He wrestled in the Alabama end with somebody else as the Green Shadows. But it was really great to hear all that today because I'd never heard of the guy except for the Sam Bass Dominoes car accident.
William, your thoughts real quick. A lot of stuff to cover today, and we are 25 minutes into the show. Pat Malone, did you take a chance to look at that video I sent?
I did look at Jimmy's video, and it was very interesting. I learned a lot. Pat Malone was before my time, but I do remember my father talking about the green shadow. I don't know if we knew that was Pat Malone, and maybe there was more than one green shadow, as Chris said. But that's really all I knew about him. So it was very interesting to listen to Jimmy talk about that. That was all news to me.
Now, when I started going to Memphis every Monday night, one thing I remember fondly, Michael, I bet you remember it too. Randy West would come down and drive down with all the video equipment. And one of the things he did, he'd pick Pat up at I think Trinity Lane in Nashville. Not sure on that, Randy. If you're watching, and you were earlier in the show. So he used to, Pat at that point wasn't driving very much, and it wasn't probably too safe for him to drive. And Randy would bring Pat down, so Pat was there when Randy was there between 4 and 5 o'clock, and you just couldn't get in the dressing room. He was a classic guy. So interesting stuff. Go to Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette deep dive on the biggest heel in Tennessee wrestling. It's 52 minutes long, and it is great. Now, it's been a hit, the new format of this show, the pictures of the weeks and the card of the weeks. And I get excited, I get fired up. We are going to back, and maybe the oldest card we've ever taken a look at. Adam, this is the card that's the very last one at the bottom of the graphic list, and it is number 4038. 4038. This is before wrestling moved in 71 to the Mid-South Coliseum. Rusty, I think, has said in past shows that he attended matches at Ellis Auditorium. I attended matches at the Cook Convention Center, never at Ellis Auditorium. The opening match on this card in May 1965 was the star of the 50s, Sputnik Monroe, against a very hated guy in the 60s who turned babyface, Tojo Yamamoto. Then they had a series of matches between Tennessee wrestlers and North Carolina wrestlers that included Mario Milano, Ron Etchison, Rocky Smith, Dale Lewis, Nelson Royal, and Nick Kozak. Kozak, Royal, Dale Lewis, and maybe Rocky Smith were North Carolina matches. Then came 2 world championship matches for the World Junior Heavyweight Championship. Danny White against Japanese wrestler Mr. Haraya. I don't know if I pronounced that. But then came a NWA World Heavyweight Championship. This was in 65. Not sure. I think Thez was defending at that point against either a former world champion or a future world champion. The main event of the night, Lou Thez and Pat O'Connor. This was at Ellis Auditorium. We'll start real quick. We'll go Pat, Rusty, Chris, and then Michael. Just that when I saw this, doing my research, I mean, this one gave me chills, folks. We'll start with you, Pat.
It does. There's a lot of people on there. You give your right arm or something to watch wrestle. You know, Nelson Royal was a guy that was in and out and kind of up and down. He wrestled in Birmingham a good bit. They would bring him in, and he was generally toward the top of the card. But that's you know, that was before, and I think you and Jimmy Cornette, Randy, did, and I think it's a well underutilized angle of the invasion. But the North Carolina and the Tennessee wrestlers is almost an invasion angle.
I always wanted to see Danny Hodge wrestle.
I did too.
I always heard so many great things about Danny Hodge. obviously Luz Thez was a great world champion, but for Sputnik and Tojo to be the opening match, I mean, like growing up where I grew up, like that's unheard of. Like what? They're jerking the curtain. Like there's no way that Tojo and Sputnik are the opener. Like my God, what a card!
Now, what year was this, Randy?
1965, May
Okay.
1965.
Well, Sputnik wasn't out of gas yet.
No, he was still around in the 70s and even came around for Power Pro Wrestling. This great card on May 31st, 1965. Dr. Robinson, what do you think?
Well, I did actually attend shows, wrestling matches, among other things, at Ellis Auditorium. Before the Mid-South Coliseum opened, that was really the only game in town for seeing a big event. So I did attend a lot of those. I do remember, alluding to Chris's point, Sputnik Monroe. My father was an insurance salesman back in the day, and he actually sold insurance to Sputnik. And in fact, when Sputnik got arrested one time for going into a black bar in Memphis, because that was against the law for a white guy to go into a black bar back in those days, my father gave him the name of a attorney to call to get him out of jail. So that's my Sputnik Monroe story.
Wow.
That's a great story. Pat, I can't remember. I know we talked to Chris and Doc. Have you commented on this card yet?
I have.
All right, that's good. That leaves it to Michael St. John.
Well, first of all, I remember this not particularly this card in Memphis, but similar cards that ran in Nashville and right around that time because I was very young and 14 years old and very much into it. The Luthez Pat O'Connor thing was on a bicycle out of St. Louis because Luthez had defeated Pat O'Connor, who had defeated Luthez the year earlier. So it was a return. It was giving Pat O'Connor, who I thought was one of the most, until this day, I think is one of the most underrated heavyweight champions in the history of the NWA. Had a chance to meet him when I was programming in St. Louis in 1992 before his death. And he was an incredible, very, very nice man, but huge. Had some of the biggest hands. The only person I ever shook hands with that had bigger hands than Pat O'Connor was Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, his hands were huge. But he invented the O'Connor roll. Push the opponent up against the ropes, go at him from the back, and then flip over him and roll him up for a quick 3 count. That's how he won the title from Luthez at the Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis in '64, I believe it was. But you also mentioned another Japanese wrestler, and you said that you didn't know if you pronounced his name right. That was Mitsuhara. And Mitsuhara was the first Japanese wrestler that Tojo brought over from the Orient after Tojo had established himself in Nick Goulas and Roy Welch's territory. They were a tag team. They were heels. And Mitsuhara was he was chiseled. He was a chisel. Unfortunately, he died in a car crash when he was wrestling. And I want to say he was wrestling in Korea or maybe even Thailand, but over there, or Cambodia. But he lost his life at a fairly young age. But that was Tojo's original Japanese partner after he had tag teamed with Alex Perez, because Tojo and Alex Perez was a big tag team back then. So the loaded card, Sputnik and Tojo, it's like, but there was a philosophy that some of the promoters used back then, and I think this may be indicative on this card, is, and I heard this, and excuse my French on this, but I'm quoting a promoter that called it this: you come out of the curtain with your dick hard. And they would come out with a match that would get people stirred up. It wasn't a couple of youngsters that were making it or trying to go up the card. They would come out with veterans that would just give them a barn burner to start the event off, and then crescendo past that. And I can guarantee you that this is a crescendo kind of card. You mentioned Danny Hodge. I had an opportunity to meet Danny Hodge. I was a big fan of him. I'll never forget on Channel 42 in Birmingham when he was making a tour as the World Junior Heavyweight Champion. He was up against, and I want to say it was one of the Welch boys or maybe a young Ron or Robert Fuller. They rang the bell. He came out to the center of the ring, jumped up on their shoulders, and pinned him 1, 2, 3, just like that. And I remember Sterling Brewer said in the time of quick as a flash, the winner of the World Junior Heavyweight Champion, Danny Hodge. The one thing you didn't want to do when you were around Danny Hodge, and that was shake his hand. and I was stooged into doing that. And I want to say it was probably either Tojo or Gypsy Joe when Danny Hodge was in the locker room. He said, "It's Michael, our announcer. Michael, shake hands with the greatest world junior heavyweight champion ever, Danny Hodge." And I put my hand out, and what a freaking mistake, because a week later, my hand was still bruised. That guy would crush your hand.
Michael, and he was known to do this. I think he was on TV in Birmingham, and I think he crushed an apple.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that video. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that.
Break a pair of
he
pliers.
crushed this, I can assure you.
Chris, what did you think about that card?
Well, that's what I said earlier. Danny, I always wanted to see Danny Hodge. I never got to see him wrestle, and I've heard so many great things about him and what a great worker he was. Of course, I've heard about the handshake deal. And as I said, obviously Luthez was a great world champion. And I mentioned about Sputnik and Tojo opening the card. I mean, opening the matches for the night. That's just amazing to me.
So, William, of these matches, Tojo Yamamoto in the opener, and then we had the Tennessee, North Carolina series of matches, Danny Hodge and his opponent, and then Thesz and O'Connor. If you had to just see one match, which match would you have been interested in on that card from 65?
Boy, that's tough. You know, I for knowledge, or just from my primary knowledge, it would have been Tojo and Sputnik, just because I knew who they were. But Luthez and O'Connor, a world heavyweight title match in Memphis, boy, that'd be tough to pick. I probably would enjoy the Sputnik and Tojo match better, but I would have wanted to see an NWA world title match.
Michael, that card right there, rate them from what you as a fan and as an announcer, both. Wow. I want, as a fan and as an announcer, to rate those four matches, and I can reread them if you cannot read that, because it's...
No, I got my go. I'm good. Just FYI, I have another question, and before I answer that, because it give me a little time to think about it, which match drew money? Which was the match that would have drawn the house? I mean, first of all, Thesz and O'Connor, they were on tour. I mean, they weren't native to our territory. They were native to Sam Munchnick's territory in St. Louis. And you didn't get a lot of wrestlers from St. Louis coming into here unless they were champions. So, it was sort of a unique event that people would, want to see them because they'd read about them in the magazines, maybe seen them on a national TV show or two. But, what of that card would draw the money? And I got news for you. I think Sputnik, Monroe, and Tojo would draw the money.
I agree.
This particular card, this is what I think. Not a wrestler or two wrestlers or four wrestlers or six wrestlers drew the house that night. I think somebody asked earlier how much the tickets were, and they didn't say on that clipping there that I could see. I would guess in 1965 at the most $2.25 for ringside, probably 50 or 75 cents for general admission. That'll be my guess. But to answer the question of who drew the house, not a wrestler. What drew the house was the two world championship matches, because at that point in time, I guarantee you, Memphis had never seen two world championship matches. So does that make sense, Michael? Because that's my answer.
I think that's 100% correct. I think you're 100% correct and right on the money, Randy, as always. Absolutely. The thing we overlooked there, and the person I didn't mention, was Mario Milano. And Mario Milano was brought over from Italy by Len Rossi, and came via New York. He went into the New York territory at first, and he was too green. And so, and again, Nick was very close at that time with the New York promoter, and it may have been pre-McMahon, but anyway, they sent him to this territory. They sent him down south, and he teamed with Len Rossi. And Len Rossi and Mario Milano were a tremendous tag team, and that was the tag team partner he had after Tex Riley died. So, and there's Mario Milano. He left the United States and went to Australia and became a huge wrestling star in Australia. But I remember him, he was sort of lanky. He was like 6'5", 6'6". And Mario Milano and Len Rossi made one hell of a tag team. Mario Milano was more of the guy that would soften him up, and Len would come in and finish him off. And I remember them on TV. I only saw him in person once, and Mario Milano went on to be a huge star down under.
Anybody else with comments from the Memphis 1965 card? We'll go Rusty.
Nothing much. I wondered how old or how long Tojo had been there in 1965. I would have
Maybe
thought
5 years. Maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna guess about 1960. So he hadn't been there that long at that point. So he was very much a bad guy, in Memphis eyes at that time.
Pat?
I was trying to rank that while it was up there, and some reason I can't get my screen full. I would rank that. I want to see the World Championship match, and then the second match, and then Tojo, and then the rest.
So we'll let Michael rank the matches as a fan and as an announcer.
Well, as a fan, and if I'm a local fan, I'm like you, Randy. I think that the two championship matches on the same card, you'd have to rank them 1 and 2, but that Tojo Sputnik thing would be 3. The wrestling match involving the Carolina versus the Tennessee crew, I think that was a spectacle, but I don't necessarily look at that as being a great match, although you had a couple of really great competitors in that. But I'll tell you, that's a loaded card. Give me a match on there that wouldn't be a main event on a normal week.
Yeah, I'm asking you guys to rank them, and I can't rank them.
And
I said world champions, the 2 world championship matches.
And you know what? And I'm gonna criticize modern wrestling. Surprise, surprise. There's not a gimmick match on there.
That's a good point. And I bet you there wasn't a drop kick the whole night.
Yeah, that's a night of wrestling right there.
Wait another 3 years, and Jerry Jarrett took over the book, and I guarantee you there'd be a gimmick match.
Yeah,
I guarantee you that.
I understand.
For sure. Now, we're going to switch gears, but right now, and just for a second, I want on the screen me and Chris right now, because we're going to talk about Blytheville, Arkansas, and we're going to talk about, I don't want the card up there now, May 20th, 1977. Chris, my question to you is that there was American Legion Arena on 2nd Street where they had wrestling there right across the street from the police station there. Did you ever go to wrestling in Blytheville and see that old white big building there on 2nd Street in Blytheville?
One time. I've been there one time. And the only thing I can remember about it is that's when Jimmy Hart was working. Jimmy Hart was there. I can't remember all the other details. If I really sat and thought about it, I probably could. But I went to Blytheville one time in my life.
So you never went to Blytheville when you were playing American Legion baseball?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, yeah. I played Legion ball at Blytheville at the old ballpark with the huge grandstand. Awesome ballpark. And you could get 2 bases on a pass ball because the backstop was 30, 40 yards behind home plate. You had to have a hell of a catcher when you played at Blytheville. But, yeah, I played against a lot of really good players. Played against Jeff Stone, who played for the Phillies. He played for Blytheville's Legion team.
King of Kingsport, Bo James, let's put his comment out there. And I'm trying to, we hadn't been too good today about doing that. He says RH ticket prices in Tennessee for 1965 was I went high. $1.50, $1.50, add 50 cents on the first 2 for two world title matches on that card. And so let's get everybody back on, and we will on screen, and we will look at I think it's the first card that I have on the card section up top, Adam. It's 4002. It's Blytheville, Arkansas, May 20th, 1977. Herb Welch was the promoter. Jerry Jarrett and Buddy Fuller was listed as the matchmaker. This was from the Blyville paper, and I don't know who did this ad. This might be the worst wrestling ad I've ever seen in my life. First of all, the place, Blyville American Legion Arena and wrestling. Then the date, then the uh, the ticket prices are up there. General admission 225, ringside 3.5, or maybe 375. At the top of the card, this is a weird ad, a real weird ad. The opener is the thing at the top of the ad. One fall, Mike Stark against Dr. X. Very unusual. Then it says the main event, 1 hour time limit, 2 out of 3 fall match. Pat McGinnis and Igor against Tommy Rich and Bill Dundee. And then listed as the second match, and this is 2 out of 3 falls in the second match. Rocky So Man Johnson against Jake the Smith Jr., which is Jake the Snake. And I don't recall him ever being in the Memphis territory for sure. And this is about a month and a half after the switch from Channel 13 to Channel 5. So this card, we'll start with you, Michael, then we'll go Michael, Pat, Chris, and William. The first thing that comes to me is I don't like this ad because, man, I just don't like the ad. But it's an interesting card, and I didn't know about Jake the Snake. So let's get some input from the panel.
Well, first of all, that's not the worst card that's ever appeared in a newspaper. If you want to see some bad newspaper ads, go back to the Goulas Welch days. Well, really the Goulas days in the late 70s, because there was misspellings and names mispronounced or misrepresented, and they'd put a picture in it and the caption would be somebody else. And I always had a problem with that. I took it right to George, and George finally got it fixed, but it would be in the Tennessee, and it would drive me crazy because, my dad worked for the Huntsville Times for 43 years and could pick out a misspelled word in a double truck spread, and he could pick out the one word that was misspelled out of all of it by just giving it a glance, and that was amazing. But so those things drove me crazy. But I agree with you, Randy. It's not laid out well. But I will say this. Why would you? To me, you put the main thing is the main thing, and the main event should be at the top. I mean, and it's dark. I mean, it would be great. Excuse the pun, but it would be great to have a picture of maybe Tommy and Bill or something that would spice it up a little bit. But and I don't know in the Blyville newspaper what this probably cost, but I know everything is done in newspapers per column inch. And so I know that Nick was paying in the Tennessean back in the 70s when I started doing his commentary. He was paying $100 a week, and he would be on the Sunday edition, and it would be in the Monday edition and the Tuesday edition. And it was just a little small column out, sort of a half of a vertical of what this is. But it could have been better put together. I don't know who Pat McGinnis or the Igor is. I mean, is that Mighty Igor from the WWE days? I remember Mike Stark. Dr. X could and should have, would have been anybody. Yeah. Rocky Johnson against, and I did know Jake Smith. I did recognize Jake Smith's name as, the future Jake the Snake. But having Tommy and Bill on the card, Rocky Johnson on the card, that had to draw some money.
I would say 600 or 700 people. Pat, comment on Blyville, Arkansas, and I'm stuck on this crappy ad.
Well, quick comment maybe on that. Not having been the sports editor for the Tiger Tracks newspaper and oftentimes having to lay it out. Sometimes you got to fit stuff in there, and it may have been a copy person in the Blyville paper that got that out. But this with Buddy Welch being in this, it reminds me of a story Jared Jarrett told me. Buddy came to him and wanted to open up some territories, and he let him and run some towns, and they were going to be partners in it. And he would come back and say, "Hey, just didn't draw anything, boss." And so he put Dundee on a card, and Dundee came back and he said, Buddy said you drew 150 people, and Dundee said, well, there were 150 people and 500 of their cousins showed up, so that was kind of the end of that. So I wondered if this was part of that little run there.
No, that was in the 80s. And another thing I think we always have to give two sides to different stories. And that story Jerry Jarrett told you was that he felt that Buddy Fuller was stealing money from him. Now, after Buddy Fuller died, Buddy Fuller's wife and Ron Fuller sued Jerry Jarrett because they said that Jerry Jarrett screwed Buddy Fuller out of his part of the company, and Jerry Jarrett ended up settling and paying big bucks to Ron Fuller, and I think her name was Sandra Welch. Bo can help me with that, but there was some controversy there. So we're giving a little, that's before my time. We're just getting I think it's important to give two stories, the different sides, and that's the side from the Jarrett side that you told, and the side I just repeated was from Ron Fuller and Sandra Welch's.
And by the way, Randy, that excuse me for interrupting, Pat, but that event caused a big schism, if you would, a schism between Jerry Jarrett and Ron Fuller that I think lasted just about until the day Jerry died.
Just wild, crazy stuff. But the card I think it will probably do 500 or 600 people, maybe $1,200 to $1,500. This card in Blytheville, Arkansas. Chris, what do you think?
Well, I always found it. Mike Stark's one of those guys that I just thought was horrible.
He's Terry Taylor's cousin. You knew that, didn't
you? Terry Taylor was way better than Mike Stark, and I don't know what.
Wow! Holy smoke!
Anyway, but first of all, Jake being there, the history, what I know about Jake, he was like at Mid-Atlantic in that era of time, I thought. So I don't know why he would be there on Blytheville on Friday. Rocky Johnson drew in Blytheville during that era. I promise you, Rocky Johnson.
Absolutely. He was hot in 77.
Yeah. Well, Tommy Rich and Bill Dundee were obviously big too, but large African-American population, Mississippi County. Rocky drew a bunch of people that night in Blytheville. I bet money on that.
Blytheville, Arkansas. Rusty?
Yeah, I didn't know much about Blytheville specifically. But I didn't think Mike Stark was quite as bad as Chris seemed to think so. But at any rate, those ads, wrestling ads from that era were notoriously bad. There'd be spelling errors, they're just flat out wrong names. And you could tell the difference when Jerry Jarrett took over from, I guess, Nick Goulas to create the ads. They suddenly were much better. They'd have pictures, they have little descriptions. And it was like night and day. So you could really tell when the ads got better.
Hey, Doc, you talk about Mike Stark wasn't that bad, and only if you're comparing him to Ron Mikulajczyk. Other than that,
hey, let me defend them now. This business is about drawing money. Lawler and Mike Stark drew big money. Ron Mikulajczyk and Lawler drew big money. So it worked. It worked.
All right. I don't ever argue because you're I mean, you know way more about this than me, but Lawler could draw money with a broom. So Stark and Mikulajczyk were bad, in my opinion.
Just real
and
one.
They both sold out with Lawler, and Lawler didn't sell out with everybody.
Randy, I think we got a great comment up there by our good friend Bo James that this was Jake's first year in the business and he bounced around everywhere working a week or two here and there just to get experience. That would make sense. That would make sense of why he would be in Blytheville on a Friday night.
Richard Hood says, what year did Jerry Lawler and Rocky Johnson have the boxer versus wrestler match? And that was in 1976. We'll go with the the very next one, and I think Pat will get a kick out of this. This is 4004 graphic. This is maybe the very first Omni card in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia, and starting at the bottom, because they had several matches, a spectacular card to start the night, and then had Eddie and Mike Graham coming in from Florida against the Medics. That might have been the interns. And then the next match was main event in a lot of places in this world. U.S. title match, Bobo Brazil versus the Sheik. Man, this was absolutely unbelievable major match. Then we had the Cadillac Tournament finals. I think Bobby Shane won that, the finals over Bob Armstrong. Then the main event was Cowboy Bill Watts against Mr. Wrestling at the Omni in Atlanta. The date on this was May of 1973. We'll start with Pat.
Is this when they were having the promotional war there in Atlanta?
Yes.
Because it looks, I think Paul Jones was involved in that, and then Ann Gunkel, and yeah.
Very interesting for sure situation.
You're absolutely right, Richard. That was a great place to watch wrestling.
The Omni in Atlanta. That card, 1973. Chris?
Well, I was always a huge fan of Bobo Brazil. I love Bobo Brazil. He actually came to Memphis one time when I was a kid that I recall, and I was there, so that was big time because he was like, the guys we grew up in the territory days that we saw on our TV. But I always say this about the racing business: the reason we don't have big heroes anymore in racing is because every race is on TV. Used to, you heard about them through word of mouth. Well, Bobo Brazil and the Sheik was that way for me. Like in 1973, I heard about them, and they were way bigger than life. Even though Lawler and Sam Bass and Jack Briscoe were great, and I saw them in person. Oh my gosh, Bobo Brazil and the Sheik. You know what I mean? So I think that the mystique of it all, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that's a great card. I did meet Mike Graham one time, and I was he's about my height. I was amazed at how small Mike Graham was.
Yeah. Randy, and Richard, to answer your question, I remember it, but I was never there to see wrestling. One thing about Bobo Brazil in Atlanta always had extremely integrated wrestling fans. It was 50-50 a lot of times. And when the house was down, Bobo was one of those they would call to get the house back up.
And Thunderbolt Patterson is another.
Yeah, and Bearcat Wright. Bearcat Wright was another. They bring him into Atlanta and the house would jump.
Yeah.
William, this Atlanta card.
Thunderbolt got me there.
Yeah, he was a hell of a talker. He could talk you into the house. William, your quick thoughts on the Omni card?
Yeah, so you mentioned this was 1973. So would that have been Mr. Wrestling 1 or 2 that was against Cowboy Bill Watts?
Tim Woods.
Tim Woods. Wrestling 1.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know for sure when Wrestling 2 came in. But I agree. The Bobo Brazil versus the Sheik match, that seemed to me like that should have been the headliner. But
I'd pay for that today.
Yeah.
Michael?
Did you guys see the special on Dark Side of the Ring about the Sheik?
Yeah.
No.
I thought it was well done until at the end they sort of got off track. And I think of this panel, I probably was Randy. I don't know if you ever met Zeb or not, but in running down the roads with him and taking him around when he was in Nick's territory in 77 and 78. He had a philosophy, and we've said it on the show a million times: red makes green. And I'll guarantee you there was juice in that match But he and Bobo Brazil, they would just turn it on wherever they were. And Pat, Coach, to your thoughts, I think you're 1,000% correct. Because back in the day when you didn't have a glut of wrestling in front of your face, whether it be on the TV or on streaming or on your iPad or your iPhone, you looked forward to seeing stars come to town. And I can remember the first time that Luthez came to Nashville when I was in college. It was a Tuesday night. And I think I had a test in economics the next day, which I probably flunked, which is probably why I'm so bad at this day and time. But I went across the street. The matches were being held at the Father Ryan Gymnasium across West End Avenue and Division Street in Nashville. And I went just to see Luthez because I'd never seen Luthez. This day and time, there's not anybody on TV, me, and I take my age into consideration, but there's not a wrestler on TV today that I would make an extra effort to go and see, knowing that I can see him on TV or on my iPhone tomorrow morning at the same for health, half the price and none of the problem.
You know what? We're going to take a little break right now, and we'll be back to the cards. I heard something interesting. I listened to a few podcasts, and we talked about the Jim Cornette podcast, and I recommend you looking for that as he deep dives in to the Green Shadow, Pat Malone, the biggest drawing heel in the history of Nashville wrestling. I want to throw this at you, and this is quick takes, and I'll throw you out the situation. The Jeff Jarrett My World podcast. Very interesting podcast, and I thought it was it was live this morning, and I listened to all of it, and it was one of the best My World podcasts I've ever seen. And Jeff's philosophy of wrestling and current wrestling mixed in with wrestling from the glory days. He just Jeff's ain't not bullshitting, and he's so smart business wise. But here's the question. This is what Jeff Jarrett said. The number one thing back in the day, whether it was Vince McMahon or Jerry Jarrett or Nick Goulas or Bill Watts, the number one thing they were trying to do is make the fans happy, where then they would spend money on the product. It is the philosophy of wrestling for decades and decades and decades. Jeff says the current WWE could care less about that, could care less about the wrestling fans, any type of fans, any house show, any of that. They said their number one priority, who would have thought we'd even say this? But according to Jeff Jarrett, the number one priority that Jeff and Conrad was talking about in the WWE, and you can't argue with them at all. Pat, what they said is the WWE and TKO's number one priority is making Wall Street happy. Agree or disagree, Pat Trammell?
Well, in the best of businesses, they're not mutually exclusive. But you know, I've run a business, as you all know, and the end of the month is a very important thing, and the end of a quarter is a very important thing. And I've had investors and all of that, and I've had to sit there and talk about when things went right and things went wrong. And there's a lot of things you can do in the short run, okay, to make an income statement or a balance sheet look better. And I think that's what Jeff is talking about. And that, you know, that the point, for example, and I'm going to bring this up, and I'm just not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of bringing back the John Cena's of the world to get a movie stars to get that belt, to get a belt, get a world championship. I'm just not. You do that because you get a bump, and you get a 60 to 90 day bump. But you don't. But if you build, and Randy, excuse me, I don't have it. If you build somebody over 6 to 8 months to get the title shot they've deserved, Lawler, for example, wrestling everybody, that builds the fans' expectations. But it's not a let's bring in John Cena because he's a movie star and we'll get more eyeballs on it and we'll deal with Cody later. That's exactly what that was. That was a short-term solution to get that pay-per-view over and get the numbers up.
That last graphic you had up there is something Jerry Jarrett used to say. I've said, Jim Cornette said, the graphic on the corporate wrestling that you put up there, corporate wrestling doesn't work. So real quick, we'll go with Rusty. First of all, Rusty, corporate wrestling doesn't work. Agree or disagree? And also the original question that I asked is, does TKO, is their number one priority making Wall Street happy? Real quick answer.
I agree. Corporate wrestling doesn't work. It's the difference between having shareholders that you have to answer to versus having fans that you have to answer to. For example, I bet most of the shareholders, excuse me, of WWE, TKO, have never even seen wrestling and don't care. They just want to see the return on their investment. So that's what happens.
It's a different business model. I'm sorry. Go.
No. Go ahead. Y'all go ahead.
Corporate wrestling, Chris, is one of the questions we're talking about, and also TKO, all they care about is making Wall Street happy.
Well, it's their job. If you're the CEO, your job's to make money for your shareholders. It's no different, Randy, than when you and I grew up. Southwestern Bell had a thing in Jonesboro. You could go down and talk to them in person. AP&L had a thing in Jonesboro. You'll talk to them in person. They've done away with all that. It's all big, huge corporate. You got to do everything online, on the phone. There's no service. There's no customer service. Customer service is gone by the wayside, i.e. wrestling fans as it relates to corporate wrestling. It's not about customer service. It's about volume, sales, streaming, and merchandise. And what's our bottom line?
Okay, the two questions we have out there right now, Michael St. John, and I'd love for our audience to make comments as well. Very interesting subjects, and we kind of took this show a different way. Does corporate wrestling work? And how about the deal about the WWE? All they care about is Wall Street, Michael.
Well, first of all, does corporate wrestling work? Are you looking at it through the eyes of a wrestling fan, or are you looking at it in eyes through an investor? And I think Pat brought that up very distinctly there. I think corporate wrestling is working for those that have stock in the company. But I agree with what Coach said. I'll bet you 85%, minimum 90%, have never turned on Monday Night Raw. They just know what the bottom line of that investor is and whether their stockbroker told them that it's a buy or a sell. And so from that standpoint, I think it's absolutely true that corporate wrestling, from an investor standpoint, does it work? Yeah. From a fan standpoint or a wrestling purist standpoint, absolutely not. But I'll say something else about wrestling today. And I said this earlier. I had an opportunity to be interviewed earlier today from a national radio station, a sports talk station, and talking about wrestling. And I made this comment, and I really think it's true, is that corporate wrestling today is stock car racing of 10 years ago. People aren't going to watch the angles, or they're going to watch the crashes, the burns, the people coming off the top rope and doing a triple salto into five guys instead of into a swimming pool. It's the flash of wrestling that is making the fans go crazy now, not the guy that is over. Although I still think there are certain personalities that draw money. I think John Cena is drawing the WWE money right now because people know that, according to John Cena, this is the last time he's going to wrestle. Do I think this is going to be his last hurrah? Maybe in my lifetime, but I guarantee you, down the line, you'll see a comeback somewhere, somehow, because they'll need that, if you would, shot in the butt.
One thing I want to add here, I know Chris is, I know Michael is, I think Pat is Well, I think all of us have our own sports, and one thing I don't care if you're a baseball fan, an NBA basketball fan, a football fan, whatever. You care about the games and the player. The owners care about the business. NFL is a business. NBA is a business. NFL is a business. Major League Baseball is a business. The wrestling world is a business without a doubt in the world. And we're going to talk more wrestling business now by going to look at slide number 4021. This is the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee. This is Jerry Lawler that wrote out this program. This is June 12th, 1977. That's interesting because we saw the Blavel card May 20th, 1977. So this is less than a month later, and this is the card for Memphis at the Mid-South Coliseum on June 12th, 1977. Jim Garvin in the opening match against Igor. The next match was a six-man tag. Rocky Johnson, Tommy Gilbert, and Sylvester Ritter, who left the territory. He was King Sylvester Ritter, and he left the territory and became a star for Bill Watts as the Junkyard Dog. Rocky, Tommy, and Sylvester Ritter against Dennis Condrey and the Exterminators. I think was Jim Dalton and Bruce Swayze, if I'm not wrong on that. Then a grudge match, Phil Hickerson against Tommy Rich, which I guarantee you was a bloodbath. Then, a couple of weeks before the Dundee program with Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee defeated Bad Leroy Brown. Then, Chris' favorite wrestler, Mike Stark, against Paul Orndorff for the Southern Heavyweight Championship. And the main event was the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes against Jerry Lawler. Pat, we'll start with you. Pat, William, Chris, and Michael.
The match I would want to see more than anything on there would be Hickerson and Rich. And I guess that's one of the few times Dusty wrestled in Memphis.
Maybe 3 times, maybe 4. Not many.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. But very good card.
Yeah, very good card. I would have liked to have seen he and Lawler work together because they had some similarities. They both were the king of the comebacks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And both could sell. I think that's very important. Now, I just like looking at that and seeing, well, back in the day when I'd buy a program or once I started going to the matches, I'd get a program. I had no idea that was Jerry Lawler's handwriting, but that's pretty colorful. Their handwriting, very good. And I learned to read a lot of Jerry Lawler's handwriting on TV formats and his book and all that sort of thing. We'll go with William to talk about June 12, 1977 at the Mid-South Coliseum. Lawler and the Big Dust.
Boy, it's so obvious when you see this card or this ad versus that ad we saw previously, which I'm sure that's why you put it up together. It's like night and day. And didn't they bring Dusty in to compete with Nick at that time? Because wasn't that when Jarrett had broken away? So they brought in Dusty to try to compete with him. I think I may not be sure of that, but I also remember the summer of '77. I must have been after this. Was the summer of Lawler and Dundee, where they sold out the Coliseum multiple times in a row. That's what I remember about that summer particularly.
It started July the 4th of 1977. The first Lawler Dundee on a holiday drew 5,500 people, and then they went to October. They went from July the 4th all the way to the end of October. Many sellouts, many memorable moments, no doubt about it. By the way, I wanted to clarify what we saw earlier was the Blavel newspaper ad, right? The Blavel newspaper ad. What we saw right there with the Memphis card was the program insert. That wasn't a newspaper ad, that was the program insert. this card from 1977. What do you think, Chris?
Oh, it's a great card with some outstanding all-time greats on the card. It's interesting that Sylvester Ritter is on the card and it says King on it. I thought that was interesting. I didn't think Lawler would ever go for that at all. And then Bad Leroy Brown. So I was 10 years old when this card happened. And of course, growing up with the song by Jim Croce, Bad Leroy Brown, you know, you're 10 years old, you think it's the real guy. You don't know any different. And I saw that sucker at Jonesboro. He was huge. And I guarantee you, I was scared of him, legit scared. So Dundee's wrestling, you're thinking Dundee's going to get killed by this guy.
My God, I mean, I would be curious to see that match because he was what, 1.5 foot taller than Bill and outweighed him 120 pounds.
He was 6'6" and 350 at least.
Yeah.
And Dundee's my height, 5'6", so he's a foot taller, and he outweighed him 125 pounds. But I mean, to walk by him, where we sat at the Legion building, and him walk by you, and then like when he wrestled with Ray Candy as Kareem, whatever he was, man, them guys, I mean, they were huge.
They would scare the heck out of a 16-year-old boy, no doubt about it. Pat, did we get your comment from that card?
We did. I will say, comment on something Frank made, and he said he probably came in from Florida, and I think that is right. You know, Jerry Jarrett and Eddie Graham were very close, and Eddie was kind of a mentor to him, and I think he helped him a lot by sending talent up when he first got started and was going toe-to-toe with Nick.
How about you, Mr. St. John? June 1977, Lawler and Big Dust.
I was finishing up my run as program director at WMPS Memphis, headed to Hartford by God, Connecticut. As my next stop, I remember it distinctly. It was a time that Jerry, again, and I think you guys hit it on the head, he was bringing in these out of market talent that only people had read about, that you were seeing for the first time in Memphis, Tennessee, and were drawing money. Leading up to this match was one of my famous promos one of my favorite promos, I should say, of all time. I had Dusty Rhodes doing a soliloquy out of Tampa, Florida, and he had a telephone in his hand. He put the telephone up to his ear and he said, "Long distance information. Give me Memphis, Tennessee. Help me try to find a party that's been trying to get a hold of me." And he did half the damn song, and he promoted the fact he was coming to Memphis and coming after Jerry Lawler. Here's the corollary to this story. A month later, 5 weeks later, my wife and my son Chris, and who was 2 years old at the time, we would take a vacation every summer back then to the Tampa Bay area, stay in Clearwater, Florida, at the Sheraton Sand Key, which was on its own little private inlet there, a great little place. It was quiet. We could take the baby. We could enjoy a few days of respite. We went down there for a week, and at the Fort Raymond Hester Armory in Tampa, Florida, that trip, we saw two things in Tampa I will never forget. We went to a highlight match, which we loved, and you could bet on it. And then we went to the wrestling matches at the I want to say the Frank Hester Armory, but it's not. Frank was a wrestler, of course. But at the Hester Armory, there's the shot of him, long distance information in Memphis, Tennessee. And the following month, Lawler was in town in Tampa as a return favor, I guess, to Eddie Graham to wrestle Dusty Rhodes. So we were on vacation, found out Lawler was in town. I called him, got a hold of him. We had lunch at a Lum's Hot Dogs.
There you go.
In Tampa, Florida that afternoon, and that night went to the matches. And the Fort Hester Armory down there was the hottest thing. And I'm not talking about just because the matches were great. I'm talking about heat. It was just, it was literally a sauna. And we went in there, and the main event was Dusty against Lawler. And of course, Dusty went over. But it was the first time in the history of my wrestling career, and I've not seen it but one time since, that a guy would get juice on his arm. And Lawler was working working on Dusty's arm, and all of a sudden Dusty's arm started bleeding. And he got juice on his arm, and it was it was a bloody mess, of course, and he ended up winning the match. But Dusty and Jerry, somebody said they would love to see the match. It was nothing to write home about because you had a very different style. Well, you had the same style in one effect in that they were both comeback artists, but their lead up to the comebacks were of a different style. So I never thought that the Dusty Rhodes, Jerry Lawler matchups were that incredible. I thought he matched up much better with a lot of other talent, especially in the AWA in later years.
All right, let's take a look at 4031. This is moving up a couple of years. This is May 21st, 1979. This is in the Robert Fuller's era of booking in Memphis. The opening match was Larry Latham against Jerry Bryant. Second match, as Robert would bring people in that he used in Knoxville, was Professor Boris Malenko, who I don't remember ever being in Memphis, but here he is on this card against Tommy Gilbert. Tony Charles coming in from Knoxville against Wayne Ferris. Thunderbolt Patterson coming from Knoxville against Sputnik Monroe. Then for the Southern Tag Team Championship, Ron Fuller and Robert Fuller, and Bill Dundee against Mr. Fuji and Professor Tanaka. Jerry Lawler, and one of the first appearances in Memphis of the Incredible Hulk. It was Hulk Hogan eventually. He was called the Incredible Hulk then, against the Mongolian Stopper and Gorgeous George. This was May 21st. A lot of Knoxville influences in 1979. We'll start with Pat.
Memphis was not big on cage matches, so this must have been a Knoxville invention. I also noticed it's Sputnik Monroe Jr., and I don't know who that might have been.
Just a guy they called Sputnik Jr. that looked like Sputnik.
Okay, okay.
Let me clarify about cages. The deal with cages was once or twice a year. Jerry Jarrett did not want to overexpose it. Some of the most famous matches, especially one of the most famous matches in history, was the cage match with Lawler and Idol with the Tommy Rich run in.
That's true. That's true.
Cage matches were important to Memphis, just not on purpose used very much, Pat.
Okay.
Let's go to Chris next on that card from 1979, the Robert Fuller era of booking in Memphis that didn't last long before he was fired.
Well, going back to those legitimately guys that scared me as a kid, the Stomper. It was so funny for me to hear, I almost thought he was unbeatable when he'd wrestled Lawler going back years and years. But to hear him talk for the first time astonished me. It was just amazing that he talked because it was so legit, back in those days. And then one of the great, seeing Tony Charles on here makes me think during this era, he wrestled Dundee in a true scientific match that I saw that was actually one of the best matches I'd ever seen. And I never thought I would like a match that was truly scientific where there wasn't punching and kicking and all that, because I always liked the heels. And of course, Professor Tanaka, he was in and out, and he was pretty intimidating figure in his time. Then the Hulk, going back to that time, the Hulk was impressive physically. He was just really green, but obviously he went on to achieve great things.
No doubt about that. Rusty, this card.
Oh yeah, it's a great card. I might have been present for that in the Coliseum, although I'm not sure. But I will say, talking about the Hulk, the first time I can remember hearing Michael St. John's voice is when they did a voiceover of the Hulk, Terry Bollea, for TV, which Michael described it, and they panned from Hulk's feet all the way up to the top of his head, and he would be posing and doing all his muscle things while Michael was talking about him. It probably took 60 seconds or so, but it was very impressive at the time. Hulk was a huge guy. He must have been 320, 330 at that time. And boy, he was as big as you ever saw him, I think, before or since. So, Michael, you did a good job because I remember that one.
God bless you. I got to tell you, Jerry Jarrett calling me and showing me that video for the first time and telling me what he wanted on that thing. I agree with you. That was one imposing figure. And I remember Deborah Jarrett saying as he got out of his little small compact car that he drove up from Florida at Jerry Jarrett's house over in Indian Lake Village, she looked out and said, "That's the biggest human being I've ever seen in my life." And she was shooting. Trust me, she was shooting. If I may, let me say a couple of things about this card. First of all, Tony Charles's name is misspelled. But how many great catchphrases are in this card? You got Thunderbolt Patterson. Mama says it bees that way sometimes. And I love Downtown Bruno, but Downtown Bruno got that phrase from good old Thunderbolt Patterson. And I don't think Thunderbolt you were talking about that Dusty didn't make a lot of trips into Memphis. I don't think Thunderbolt made a lot of trips into Memphis either. Also,
I read 4 weeks.
4 weeks?
Gone in 4 weeks.
Gotcha. And I'll talk about Professor Tanaka and Mr. Fuji. I remember the tag team. Was Pat Tanaka legitimately Professor Tanaka's son? And was Tora Tanaka and Professor Tanaka the same person?
Yes, they were Professor Tanaka and Tora Tanaka, the same person. And somebody mentioned whether Mr. Fuji, who was later a manager in the WWF, and Tanaka and Fuji was one of the great heel tag teams of all time that went to all the territories.
Indeed, and that was. I'm glad you brought that up, Randy, because that I was going to bring up that Mr. Fuji you later saw in the WWE. But you look at this card, you got Wayne Ferris. It seems like you look at the boys that were brought in from Knoxville, and they didn't seem to. I mean, you can just look back at it and say, well, they didn't hold a candle to the boys that were in Memphis, because you look at Ferris and Gilbert, Larry Latham. I mean, those were great talents upon themselves. One of our listeners wanted to know, do we ever have any video of Larry Latham talking? I did an interview when they were the Blonde Bombers with Wayne Ferris and Larry Latham where he actually talked. But Larry Latham came to his own. Whoever created Moondog Spot or the Moondog with Larry Latham, that was a match made in heaven. He was a natural Moondog. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's take a look at 4036. This is a territory we haven't talked about, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because there's not a lot of matches. This is Expo Center in Indianapolis. This is Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder territory, and there was 7 matches on this card in May of 1979, and even though they had 7 matches, we have 3. Spike Huber, which was Wilbur Snyder's son-in-law, I think I'm right in saying that, against Bobby the Brain Henning. Then Brody, who was not, this was Dick the Bruiser's territory, so he wasn't going to let Bruiser Brody, just like Sam Munsnick didn't let Bruiser Brody be called Bruiser Brody in St. Louis, Indianapolis either. He was called King Kong Brody or just Brody. So Brody against Bobo Brazil, and the main event was Roger Kirby and Paul Christie. Paul Christie, a hell of a talent, against Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. This is the end of that territory without a doubt. The end of the Indianapolis territory and close to the end of Dick the Bruiser's in-ring career. We'll start with Pat, Indianapolis. Quick thoughts.
I would love to see Brody and Bobo Brazil.
Yeah, so your 2 matches of all the matches we talked about, Brody or Bobo Brazil and somebody else earlier we talked about, the Sheik, I think, and that match we just talked about, and that's interesting as well. Michael, this Indianapolis card.
It was very, very well influenced when you look at it by the Sheik's territory, because several of these boys were in the Sheik's territory at the time. But you're right, that was on its last leg, and I think once they lost Channel 4 TV in Indianapolis, they just went away. But Bruiser and Crusher as a tag team, that the Bruiser Crusher thing is very synonymous to the Lawler Dundee thing. They were either tag team partners or they were killing each other, and that was true to the form of Louisville or of Indianapolis wrestling in that area, in Detroit, as it was to Memphis. Crusher and Bruiser were akin to Lawler Dundee.
This makes me think back, and we've had this conversation before, but I've talked about territory wrestling. It's like having a home football team in your town. Lawler and Dundee for us here in Memphis, and you go around. Bruiser and Crusher for that area. Those were the hometown heroes. So that ethnic group, that working blue collar group, they drew because of how they connected with that group of fans. And I always call it the home. Like when we compare territories, well, I grew up with the Memphis territory. That's my home team. And all these others are the visiting team, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
So the people that grew up watching Bruiser and Crusher, that's their home team. Like you can't knock Bruiser and Crusher. Although, I mean, every time I watched them work, it wasn't very exciting for me, but they were also older by the time I saw them. And then, of course, Brody was everywhere. I guess you'd call him a free agent, but whatever. But you get the concept of it was like our hometown. We didn't have professional sports in Memphis, so our star quarterback was Jerry Lawler. Our star running back was Bill Dundee, so forth.
All right. William, just real quick. Indianapolis, I've never been there.
Yeah, Chris is exactly right about the Bruiser and the Crusher. They represented sort of the Eastern European immigrants to the Midwest, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Indianapolis, and Chicago. They were, in fact, of that ethnicity. So they represented the blue-collar, cigar-smoking, beer-drinking crowd and they were very good at drawing those people to those places. They probably wouldn't have done as well in Tennessee or in Atlanta or Florida, but boy, they were perfect for that area.
All right. Here's a card that me and Chris specifically can get into. So we'll go with $39.99. If there's a mistake on this ad, the person that would either ride his bicycle to take on a handwritten card or would call in. I first started calling in and then decided to just write it out and ride my bicycle to the Jonesboro Sun. This is a much better looking wrestling ad than the Blibble ad we saw. Is there any way to have them both up there at the same time? If there's not, Adam, just go back to the Blibble ad that we showed, the very first card that we had, and look how just awful it's looking. I mean, that's not exciting at all. And this, go back to Jonesboro. I saw this. This came out always in the Jonesboro Sun on Thursday, the afternoon paper, the Thursday afternoon. It was at the American Legion Arena. So this was, there's probably just 5 or 6 more months left in wrestling at the old American Legion Arena with the wash tub ring light that Tommy Rich used to like to take a backdrop and bust the lights out, and just very, very exciting. I like the look of this ad, and the children under 10 were $10. General admission was $3. Ringside, which was second row and back, was $3.50, and the first row tickets were $4. You see the Watch TV5 Saturday morning for Studio Wrestling. And then Sputnik Monroe Jr. against Bob Owens was the opening match. Then Tommy Gilbert Sr., Tommy Gilbert against Wayne Ferris. Bobby Lyons, who I don't remember. I remember a Bobby Lyons, Lyons, but in other territories. I have no idea if that's the same guy or not, against Jerry Bryant. Then the Blonde Bombers, Larry Latham. I thought it was interesting that it says Punk Rock Ferris. Normally in other territories he was called Punk Rock Ferris. I don't remember that. ever in this territory. Wayne Ferris, Larry Latham, the Blind Bombers against the Gilberts. I'll tell the story. Robert was booking earlier in '79 when Eddie Gilbert debuted. It was his idea to put them together when Eddie debuted as Tommy Gilbert Jr. Nobody liked that. The fans knew that was Eddie Gilbert. I mean, Jerry Jarrett hated it. As soon as he fired Robert Fuller as booker, they changed the name to Eddie and Tommy Gilbert within the next month. But a good-looking ad there, Chris.
Very good-looking ad. And for the other three on the screen that don't know, the Sun office was next to the Legion Arena.
Right.
You know, right next door. So that's sort of ironic on the publicity side. But I was there at this card. I can't remember specifics, but I can tell you I was there. The Blonde Bombers, Danny Davis was not with the Blonde Bombers. And RH, I don't remember when that separation happened, but he's not on the card, obviously. And as I mentioned earlier, the Stomper, and then Bo mentioned a while ago about he heard kids laughing one night and said, imagine my shock, my 5-year-old and 3-year-old nephew laughing. I turned the corner and the Stomper was playing with them.
Yeah.
In May of 1979, I can't imagine that because I wouldn't get anywhere near him. So, I mean, that dude was legit, and he was in great physical shape, and he had that piercing look, and he'd no-sell Lawler's punch, which KO'd a lot of people in the days, and so he was an intimidating figure. But I'll guarantee you I was here for this event.
All right, William, that card is a whole lot more exciting and more impressive than the Blyville card, because at least at the top, main event, Southern Heavyweight title, Jerry Lawler versus the Stompers. Then the hottest team in the territory, the Blind Bombers against the Gilberts, and then the opening 3 matches. Impressive card, impressive ad. And let's look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 wrestlers and 1 referee. Not much of a payroll there for that card. What do you think, William?
Oh, yeah. Boy, the Stomper was so intimidating. I remember at one time, back when Jerry Lawler had his army, he was going as General Lawler rather than the King Lawler. When he recruited the Stomper to join the army, we thought everything was over. They were going to kill the territory, because that was the idea. Lawler was the heel then, and he was going to take over the Memphis territory, and that was going to be all she wrote for Memphis. That's how much we believed in the Stomper. The other thing I noticed about that card, I do not remember Wayne Ferris being called Punk Rock Ferris. I don't think I've ever heard that. I certainly saw him team with Larry Latham a number of times, but I don't remember seeing that in Memphis.
No, me either.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier. Pat, what do you think about this Jonesboro ad and this Jonesboro card?
Well, I like the ad fine. I don't know if Larry Latham's name's spelled right or not, but it's interesting to me because I've watched a lot of the Stomper in Memphis, and he had a run in the mid '80s in Atlanta, and a different souled guy all the way around. He was almost a creature, just a guy that hits and all that, and you have to pull him off and all that stuff. But that guy was, I love watching him in Memphis. He was a heck of an athlete.
Michael?
Well, Archie was a nice guy. I mean, you were talking about playing with the kids. That was him. I mean, when you got to talking to him, he was a super nice guy. The card, except for the spellings, I think the card is loaded for that town and for that time of. This was I agree. Larry Latham, I think, was with an N, and that Bobby Lyons. I remember calling matches with Bobby Lyons briefly, and it was Lyons, and I think it's the same guy, Randy, that you were alluding to. But Jerry Lawler and the Stomper, they put on some matches. And then without a doubt, but I would think that tag team match. If Tommy and Eddie were at their peak and knowing what the Latham and Ferris were all about, I got to tell you, that probably brought the house down in itself. But Lawler and the Stomper, what a great main event.
So, RH, what do you think that drew? Probably 500?
Maybe 6 or 7.
6 or 7, because I'm trying to figure up the ticket sales in my head. Because I paid $2 to get in, so I guarantee you I got a Coke and a hot dog and some popcorn. So $5. I spent $5. I promise you. I know that's a long time ago, but that was probably my allowance for that night.
We're not going to go overtime today, and we're not going to get into this whole show. I'm going to quickly go through some of these real quick. Back to the picture part, 3977. This was in 1980. Jerry Lawler broke his leg, one of the most traumatic injuries ever, and it was covered in the Memphis Commercial Appeal and the Press Scimitar. This is Jerry Lawler, big news, front page news at the in the Memphis papers, no doubt about it. Next picture I want to take a look at, I'd never seen, is the very next picture loaded. This is a newspaper article, and Pat and Michael certainly can help out more than I can, or Rusty can, or Chris can. This is Harry Thornton signing a contract with Nick Gulas, May 17th, 1961. I wasn't born yet, folks. I
was 3.
So this is 3. This is Harry Thornton, Roy Welch, and Nick Gulas signing the contract. This was a find. I thought this was interesting, Pat.
That is interesting. One thing real quick, Richard, you're right. Don Carson was Stomper's manager in Atlanta, and he did all the talking. That is really interesting. I've never seen that either. It talks about them having matches at the American Legion and the BFW. I'd like to see that where I could read it. That is interesting. That's a young Nick there.
Yep.
5 figures, Pat. 5 figures.
There you go.
Hey, Randy.
Yeah.
Why was wrestling run in so many VFWs and Legion halls?
Because it was cheaper, and back then there wasn't a lot of, especially in a lot of towns, there wasn't a lot of the 10,000 seat buildings, and the basic thing in the Legion halls, the American Legion building in Jonesboro, the only thing bigger back in that time would have been Jonesboro High School or the Indian Fieldhouse, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Not many options.
I got you.
For sure. I want to look at this picture. 3996 is a great picture of Andre the Giant with the original cameraman in Memphis. This is Mike Shields. Very interesting picture. And man, Andre the Giant was really a big dude. Then,
gosh, how tall was Mike, Randy?
I'd guess 5'7".
I mean, he looks like an average-looking guy. Wow.
Andre was just big, man, without a doubt. Somebody that drew a lot more money in Birmingham and Chattanooga than he did in Memphis, even though he was over somewhat in Memphis, is 39.98. Matt Jewell, Bearcat Brown, from 1935 to 1996. He died in 1996 at 60 years old. Bearcat Brown. So we got to let Pat and Michael talk about Bearcat Brown. So obviously my memories mainly at Bearcat was underneath, not a main event wrestler, even though at times he was. And I think I remember him and Glenn Rossi in Memphis, but not in Jonesboro. Pat, real quick thoughts on Bearcat Brown.
Bearcat and Lynn Rossi were huge, and we told the story on here before, but those two did more for integration in Birmingham, Alabama than Martin Luther King ever thought about. I mean,
Michael?
they had great matches too.
Pat, 100% agreed. Bearcat Brown was over the top. He could draw money in this area like all get out. Him and Lynn Rossi were magic. The famous finishing move for Bearcat Brown. Pat, you might remember, what was his finishing move?
God, headbutt, right?
The headbutt would set it up, but he did the big atomic leg drop.
That's right.
And Jerry Jarrett took that finishing move and gave it to another wrestler named Hulk Hogan.
Huh.
There you go.
I didn't know that.
4001. 4001. Without looking at your notes, tell me who this is, Pat.
I know, but I can't call it.
Michael?
I've never seen this picture before. Is that Don Green?
No. Think of this guy wearing a mask.
Johnny Walker.
Johnny
Yes,
Walker.
sir.
Thank you, Richard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I'd have seen it full on instead of a profile, I'd have probably got it.
Yeah, he passed away last year, right?
Let me look.
Recently,
He
yeah.
passed away in 2020, 5 years
Okay.
ago. He was 85 years old. The next picture is 4011. This is a young, beautiful Bobby Eaton. Man, he was young in this picture. He was born in 58, passed away in 2021 at 62 years old. Now, I want to look at this one, 4012, and I want Pat and Michael to especially tell me what television this was at. Lynn Rossi at television, 1929 to 2020. Lynn Rossi was 91 years when he passed away. Any idea, guys, what TV this was?
Yes, absolutely. Been there a million times. Sat behind the desk right up here on Montesano Mountain in Huntsville, Alabama. That's Grady Reeves, who was the Harry Thornton equivalent in Huntsville, Alabama. His son Robert and I are still good friends. I have Robert on the air anytime he wants to come on the air. Great guy, great people. Grady Reeves bought his engagement ring for his wife from my mother at the jewel shop on next to W.T. Grant on Washington Street in Huntsville. That's Lynn Rossi at Channel 19. That studio was not much bigger. That was the smallest of the wrestling studios that they did live championship wrestling on throughout the territory. If you look in the back, there's an art card with pictures on it, and that's how they promote the matches coming up Friday night at the Patton Street Armory in Huntsville, Alabama, or later the Madison County Coliseum out on Holmes Avenue. But that was an art card that Nick would arrange the pictures, and then they'd go down and they'd tell you who was wrestling and show you a black and white picture of them.
This next picture, I just not anything to do really with Memphis wrestling except a couple of appearances here or there on one guy, but on the other. This is Vern Gagne, Arm Dragon, Nick Bockwinkel. Vern Gagne, Nick Bockwinkel, and that's a classic picture, guys.
That is a classic picture.
Oh,
That's-
yeah.
That's probably, I mean, Vern still looks like he's got something in him, so that's probably early 70s.
I would say 74 maybe.
I'm thinking mid-70s also, yes.
Okay.
Next picture that I want to look at is 4016. This is a neat little wanted poster. This is Ron Wright. $500 reward paid to any man that will close the other eye.
That's great.
Signed by Don Carson.
Oh, that's great. Oh, man. That is great.
I hadn't seen that before. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's great.
Haven't seen that angle in a while.
No,
Yeah.
not old school Adam at all. 4017. This is probably in the last 9 or 10 years. This is Paul Heyman, and Lance Russell. Great picture there. I like this next picture. Let's just go ahead and hit the next one. This is 3 pictures in a row. This is 95 Louisville Gardens, and this is Smoky Mountain Wrestling and USWA. This is a wrestling invasion gone right, and people were riot ready every week. Let's just look at all 3 of these pictures. Great pictures.
That's some
Well,
great photography there. The lighting, you can smell the popcorn, can't you?
And I think the Louisville Gardens held about 6,000, 6,500, and it looks like there's 30,000 people in the arena.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely packed.
let's also, we drew money in that deal. There's no doubt about it. The next picture, Adam, please. This is again Lawler's handwriting, and Rusty. This is a classic picture with Dusty with the figure four, Lawler trying to do a rope break. Good picture in the Action Ringside Wrestling program sold for 50 cents at the Mid-South Coliseum.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you can tell it's the Coliseum because in the background you see those kind of diamond-shaped things. That was between the loge, which is the upper level, and the floor. The floor seated maybe 4,000, something like that, and then the loge seated another, I don't know, probably 4,000 or 5,000 after that. So altogether it was about 10,000, 12,000. So yeah, you can always sell the Mid-South Coliseum when you see pictures like that.
Without a doubt.
Please do, Bo. $4023. This is the old wrestling news that Pat Malone used to order from Norman Keitzler, and he would bring them to the Mid-South Coliseum, make him a few dollars. He'd buy the magazine at cost from Norman Keitzler of Wrestling News, and then he'd find somebody to sell them. One of the covers is Tommy Rich and Robert Fuller, and the other one is Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Golding. The next picture is the Ringsider Wrestling magazine with a very young Ron and Robert Fuller there. Then we have 3 pictures of Jackie Fargo here, as a matter of fact. That's Jackie Fargo and the intern, followed by Jackie Fargo looking badass, and then this is a bruised up Jackie Fargo. Wow.
No doubt about it. As
and Don Carson put a $500 bounty if you could close Jackie Fargo's other eye, right?
That's right. And then he was cheap there. He didn't do a poster, the bounty poster right there. This edition of Talking Memphis Wrestling, I'll start with Rusty because he's seen this and Chris hadn't. Today's episode, what did you learn, Rusty?
Oh boy, a number of things. You reminded me of the Hulk Hogan video that Michael St. John narrated, and I hadn't thought about that in a long time. What else? I always enjoy hearing the names of the promoters in other parts of the Tennessee territory, like Harry Thornton. We didn't even really know, or we barely knew that they existed. If you were in Memphis, you thought that was the center of the universe for wrestling. So you really hardly even understood that there was wrestling that had many of the same guys in Birmingham, in Huntsville, in Knoxville. So it's really fascinating to me to hear about all those guys.
What did you learn, Chris?
I agree with Doc. I was going to say, when Michael was talking about the picture of Lynn Rossi and the TV station and laying all that out, and the guy that was the announcer, and I always learn a lot about that end because, as he said, we didn't know that on our end. We thought we were in the Mecca. We didn't know anything else existed until Channel 17 Atlanta started putting it on TV, and we're like, oh wow, there's other people in the world besides ours.
Pat, what did you learn today from Talking Memphis Wrestling?
What I
won this year.
Beg your pardon?
It was episode number 21 this year.
All right. In episode 21, I learned because we saw a lot of people that would come in to the territory in Memphis and other thing, and we saw cards of different towns. And it's interesting to see how people put together the cards in different towns and what they're looking to get out of it. But always, if you could have him, it's Lawler at the top. For obvious reasons.
Michael, what did you learn today?
Well, I thought the highlight of the show for me was Coach pointing out that we're the home team. in whatever town back in the territory days. And he's 100% right. You were the home team in your town. And you knew wrestling was going on in Atlanta and in Pittsburgh and in Detroit and wherever, but it was all about what was going on in your territory, the feuds, the programs, the wrestling shows that you were seeing at home. And I think that was a very poignant, that could be sort of the umbrella of this whole show, is that we showed hometown wrestling from a whole bunch of hometown perspectives.
That's a great thing. This is final takes from everybody. Rusty, I want to know the Blues Doctor podcast that you took a week off of last night, the Blues Doctor podcast, the Blues Doctor recommends. Are we back tonight at midnight, and what's the subject matter?
Yes, we are. The Blues Doctor was doing house calls last week, so he was too busy to put up a episode this week, but we just put up the episode for this week, this afternoon, so it will come out at midnight tonight. If you're interested in President Biden's recent cancer diagnosis, we're going to do a deep dive on that. And it may make some people nervous, or it might be controversial. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in that, to take a listen to it.
Chris, you hadn't been with us in a long time. What do you have coming up next week? School is out.
Oh, yeah. We work a lot in the summer, but I am going to get to go watch the Royals and the Tigers coming up. Getting to go to the Major League Ballpark for a couple of days, so I'm excited about that. But I'll be back in time for the show next week. But summer's better. I don't have to worry about buses, so it's like a whole different world for 9 weeks of peace. Is like what I call it. So I'm looking forward to being back on again.
How about you, Pat? What do you have going in the next week before episode number 22 next Tuesday night?
I'll open up my email and they'll tell me, or I'll yell in there and she'll tell me.
That's the truth of the matter. You like the show tonight?
I did very much, and I enjoyed being with the four of y'all, and I enjoyed being with all our folks, PJ and Eddie and Thomas and everybody else. I don't want to miss anybody. Ahmad, good to see you, my friend, and it's been a great 2 hours.
Michael, what do you have going on?
Well, it's now we're getting ready to get busy and start pre-selling high school and college football. I got to tell you, and I feel so good about this show the past few weeks. It's so good when we can get the band all together and get us all on screen. And I think you see that with the reaction of the folks that are watching and listening. And to have Coach and Pat and Doc and you, Randy, it's just such a thrill for me. I look forward to it all week long. And it's just, I think we've hit on something. I think we've hit on we're like coal miners. We're in the mine and we've struck the ore. And I think we've got to continue this because it's very, very interesting. But getting the perspectives from everybody involved, I think just adds to that. And then when you get the perspective of the listener and the viewer, it makes it even better. So I think we're on a home run track right now.
All right. I got something else. We got a major complaint about last week's show because we had somebody mad at me, but we won't get into that right now. But I offended somebody, and it wasn't for even saying the F word. It was for something else. And Michael, I think you were right along with me, backing me up on that subject. I'll send you a text message maybe tomorrow. Adam just reminded me we have one picture, and we'll hold up on that till I say air it. But we did a lot of times you come up with ideas for music videos, songs you like. Randy West used to do that. I used to do it as well. And I liked the country music group Sawyer Brown. They were big wrestling fans. They got Ron and Don Harris in the wrestling business, Mark Miller and Sawyer Brown, and they had a song called Gypsies on Parade. Pat, this is an assignment for everybody, really. Just when we get off today, go YouTube Bill Dundee music video, Gypsies on Parade. One of the shots in that video is a picture that we inserted in the thing, and here to describe this picture is Michael St. John.
Oh boy. Oh boy. This is a good one. Yours truly, Randy Hales, Jeff Jarrett, superstar Billy Dundee, and of course, the legend of legends and Eddie Marlin. This is a great shot. And I want to say this is backstage at in Nashville, maybe?
No, that's Memphis.
It is Memphis. Okay.
That's one of the bigger dressing rooms, and that's probably the interview room.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I remember it now. I remember that now. Boy, what a great picture. Great times, great folks right there. Except for the little guy with the beard.
When did you have a beard? I don't remember that.
I grew the beard. It's funny. I grew the beard in '77 because of Nick Goulas. I had a mustache from the time I was in college, and I went on TV in Tennessee, and Nick called me in one day, and we were talking. He said, "Can I make a suggestion?" He said, "I think you need a beard." He said, "A lot of folks say you look like you got too much of a baby face." I wouldn't get that comment now, obviously, but he said, "You need a beard. It makes you look older. It makes you look more mature." Okay, so I grew it, and my close girlfriend, confidant at that time, said to keep it short, keep it close, and I did. And I had it from 1977 until 1989, 1990 maybe. And Jerry Jarrett suggested that I shave it off because I was looking a little old on TV. So a promoter convinced me to put it on, and a promoter convinced me to shave it off.
This was a lot of fun. Always great to have Michael St. John, Pat Trammell, Dr. Robinson, and Chris Ellis back in the fold, speaking as a Jonesboro Golden Hurricane. This is Randy Hales saying so long, everybody, for talking.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.